Since last year, Montech is on a freaking rampage. One case after another, and considering their price tags, it's kinda hard to compete for a lot of companies out there. So let's take a closer look at their newest market disruption, the Montech Air 903 Max. In total, there are two versions of this case, of the 901, a base and a Max version, which is the one of today. As far as I could see, the difference between the two is just that the base has three 140mm fans, two of which are in the front, and the Max has three 140mm ARGB fans, three of which in the front, and then another additional one in the back in black without any RGB. And then of course the corresponding ARGB controller and fan hub. Other than that, you can always choose between the black and the white version. Anybody with at least two working brain cells should guess where Montech is going with the two keywords they got out of the PC hardware name generator. This thing is made for airflow. The complete front of the case is covered by an all-mesh panel. All mesh, all air let through we and all see-through we for that extra dose of ARGB. According to Montech, that panel should have like a 51% ventilation rate, whatever that is exactly supposed to mean. But the cool thing about it is that you can easily take it off by pulling on it from the bottom. It's nice and easy to clean while giving you access to the fans without actually removing the front panel. An action that sometimes tends to end with broken clips and bleeding hands. But let's go a step back and look at the case as a whole. The 903 Max mid-tower case measures 465mm by 232 and by 492. It stands on quite rigid 2.5cm high feet, so overall all good there. The left side of the case is covered by a big tempered glass side panel at 2.5mm thickness. Not the best we've seen, but keeping in mind Air is supposed to be Montech's entry line of cases, it's really alright. The overall case feels fine, nothing flexes too much. I would even say it's roughly on the same level as deep-cooled CH510. On the inside, we are looking at a very respectable compatibility list. Mini ITX, ATX and even eATX EEV can fit in here. Just keep in mind that you will lose these rubberized cable holes once you go beyond regular ATX. For the GPU, it looks just as great. The case being quite long means that we can fit up to 400mm long cards, so you can go ahead with your RTX 4090 without any issue, as you can see here on the basis of our 4080. For the depth, we got quite the gap in front of the removable PCIe brackets. In total, we are looking at about 20cm, so no issue for these beautiful and obviously well-designed NVIDIA octopuses. On the top side of the case, we will also find the I/O panel, two USB 3.0 Type A's, a nice and clicky start and reset button, audio in and out, and a USB Type-C. At the back of the I/O panel, we will also find the ARGB button. That one goes into the ARGB controller and fan hub located in the back compartment. By default, all four fans are already pre-attached to that thing, but you can add another three ARGB devices or two fans, or just use splitters. From there you will need to connect it to SATA power using the SATA power cable, which is coming out just underneath it, which makes sense, and 3-pin ARGB and PWM on your motherboard in case you want to control everything by software, whereas only PWM is mandatory. You can also not connect the ARGB one and just use the button in the top. Overall, I have to give Montech some credit on the I/O. It feels like slightly higher quality than on previous cases they've released, not by much, but the clickiness and the label print feels like a small improvement overall. In the back of the case we'll find the usual stuff, a separate PSU and hard drive compartment, which by default allows the power supply to be about 220mm long without risking the cables. But you can always make that infinite by just removing the hard drive cage in front of it. Speaking of which, that thing can be used to install one 3.5 inch inside of it and another one on top. For 2.5 inch drives we got 5 spots max, 2 behind the motherboard and 2 right next to it from either the front or the back side. And the top 3.5 inch spot on the cage doubles as another 2.5 inch spot. But keep in mind that they are shared. And this cage is also the spot where we will find the box of goodies containing the usual amounts of screws, straps and short manual. As far as cable management is concerned, it's a very appropriate amount for a mid-tower or mid-budget friendly case. We got about 1.8 millimeters of space in between the back and the right side panel, which is slim, but it was surprisingly easy to route all of the cables for this build in there. Using the straps, it was better than I expected. To get there, we can use these nicely rubberized cable holes as well as the usual holes all around the motherboard, and a bunch of Montech straps in the back can help you squeeze all of those cables into a chunk of mess. Quite well planned here is the motherboard placement, which is pushed down by quite a bit, making it very easy to route the top cables or radiator, as well as the extra hole in the bottom meant for the GPU power cables or the Octa-P, which made it very easy to connect the GPU, something that is absolutely mandatory nowadays. But not every case does it. And now let's get to cooling. It's good. For the CPU cooler, we can go with up to 180mm high coolers, which good luck finding that. However, now I do know that a Be Quiet Darkrock Elite with a slightly elevated fan is exactly what you can do in here. So that setup works. If you have higher RAM, elevate the fan one step, perfect. But it's really the fans where this case has it. The front of the case supports up to 3 140 or 3 120mm blowers, all three of which are already pre-filled using Montech's so-called MPH 140mm fans. There is no real documentation on these, but we will get to them afterwards. The top looks almost as good. Underneath the magnetic dust filter, we got another 2 140 or 3 120mm spots, and thankfully Montech has used more than 3 brain cells and made the whole thing mesh. So 140mm fans are fully utilized and you are able to use those oversized 160mm fans that have actually just 140mm mounting. The back of the case has another 120 or 140mm spot, again occupied, but this time with a non-RGB 140mm Montech fan. In theory, there are another 2 spots located on top of the power supply compartment. These are usable with very regular radiator screws, and yes, the whole thing is mesh. However, in contrast to a case like the Montech Sky 2, there is not really any good air path for air to get underneath there. Sure, the most bottom fan or the most bottom front fan does push some air underneath the whole thing, but don't expect it to do any wonders. For the most part, it may help redirect air into your GPU, but other than that, those two don't really do that much. In the case that you are going water, we got radiator support, up to 360 or 280 in the front and in the top. And Montech did quite the good job with these spots. For the front red, we are looking at up to 60mm until you start hitting the PSU shroud. And the top portion is basically free, given it's pressed to the front while the motherboard is lowered quite significantly. You might get into trouble with like push-pull 280 based radiators, but in 360, yeah, you could go straight down until you hit the GPU, which we may do one day. In case the max version of the Air 903 still isn't enough for you, you can always upgrade it to the Air 903 Max Ultra using Montech's separately available vertical GPU mounting kit. So how did the case do overall? The build went fine, except for a GPU that had a few broken parts, but that's for the build video. But in general, there is very little negative to be said about the case. The airflow is great, the front panel really does let a lot of air through, and given that the case comes like that, as long as you're not doing like 4090 paired with 4900K builds in here, there is no real reason to exchange the pre-installed fans. You can control everything over PWM to a point where it's barely noticeable at all during normal operation, but still capable of spinning up if necessary. But if you want to have some numbers, this is the build we did in it, and these are the numbers during a permanent Furmark 1080p all-in and Cinebench 24 run. Seems perfectly reasonable considering there is a 13700K in there. Sure, the CPU gets quite hot, but the temperature doesn't change when I open up the side panel, the temperature side panel, so that's just how hot it gets. So performance-wise, the case is great. It did the job. Compatibility-wise, too. For 2023 standards, everything is on point, especially the cooling. The front is great, how they're designed. The top is great, mesh holes everywhere and space in between potential radiators and motherboard. Well planned for something that has air in the name. But not everything was good. The usual Montech issue applied as it always did. Build quality is good, but not perfect. It's really the little things, like our front panel, which has a slight dent, which may or may not contribute to it not sitting absolutely flush on one of the sides. No, not may or may not. It's definitely the reason why it doesn't. Our front fans were straight up dirty. But it's not dirty like a house dust thing, but like industrial type of dust. Black dust. The one that gives you cancer. They just came like that. I cleaned them and they are good, but yeah. But this is still a budget case and you can definitely still see like the little budgety aspects of it. But as long as the price is fine, everything is fine. Another comment I have would be the right area in between the motherboard and the front panel, which is just straight up useless. Sure, you can mount SSDs to it, but I kinda missed that cable bracket hiding thing that Montech used in a number of cases. That would have fitted great in here, and now there is just like that empty area that does nothing, which is kind of sad. So where do we stand as a product? The Air 903 Max retails for slightly below 80 here in Central Europe, and that's one hell of a price. This thing is quality-wise very much okay. I would put it in the same category as a Deepcool CH510. And yes, you don't have that fancy monitor, but what you do have is a case pre-filled with fans that are strong enough for a very good build and quiet enough if you don't need them. And that makes the whole case like great out of the box and just ready to be built. And for 80 euros, that's amazing. And even on a Montech standard, that's quite good. It's like their X3, sure, also a bargain looking at how much you will get for the price, but here you get quite the better stuff. So from our side, it's a definite recommendation if you are looking for a build and go case in the budget range. It's still budget, it's not a Be Quiet, a Fantex case or whatever other company, but for the price point, it's going to be hard to beat this. But okay, for today, this is going to be it for Montech and their Air 903 Max, because Ultra was already taken. On a side note, we also have a Discord server, so if you wanna join, the link is down below. And of course, we still have channel membership, so if you're looking for a good way to sell your soul for an OG poop emoji, that's a pretty good way to go. Additionally, you can rest assured that the income will not only keep the channel afloat, but will also serve to write a website for manufacturers to generate their own product names. It's just an array filled with keywords and a randomized selector, but everybody could use it. Anyway, thank you for watching, and if you want to continue, have a look at our take on the Fantex M25 fans, because they are a bit overkill and interesting, like most Fantex fans. Hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.